news, President Trump is declaring victory over Islamic State in Syria, and he now plans to withdraw all U.S. ground forces from the country. Top members of Congress in both parties, fearful about the growing influence of Russia, Turkey, and Iran, are slamming the decision.
It's a terrible thing for our nation. It's a terrible thing for the allies that we've been working with.
In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls the terror tunnels from Lebanon an act of war by the militant group Hezbollah, but gets no support from the United Nations.
And the U.S. Congress has agreed on a spending bill to avoid a government shutdown at least until February. It does not include the funding that President Trump has been demanding for his Mexico border wall.
From the I24NEWS studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with David Schuster and Tal Heinrich.
President Trump, in a reversal of U.S. policy, has decided to withdraw all 2,000 U.S. ground troops from Syria.
Mr. Trump tweeted today, "We've defeated ISIS," but Pentagon officials and Republican lawmakers say there are other factors to consider, that the withdrawal could lead to chaos. Correspondent Kenneth Moten has details.
President Trump is claiming victory in Syria over ISIS and is expected to announce that all U.S. troops will be withdrawn in the next 30 days. Right now, 2,000 American service members in Syria are providing assistance and security in the fight against ISIS, which still controls pockets in Syria and Iraq. President Trump tweeted Wednesday morning, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria. My only reason for being there." The White House released a statement saying U.S. troops have started returning home as a transition to the next phase of the campaign. But the Pentagon followed with a similar statement, making it clear, quote, "The coalition has liberated the ISIS-held territory, but the campaign against ISIS is not over." The coordinated comments come a week after a very different message from the state and defense departments.
Nobody is declaring a mission accomplished. Defeating the physical caliphate is one phase of a much longer-term campaign.
Bipartisan reaction on Capitol Hill, swift.
I don't know who advised that this decision be made, but it's a terrible mistake.
Was this decision made with the advice of the military or counter to the advice of the military? That's the first question that I want to know.
We've been at war for too long. I commend the president for his decision.
The most vocal critic, Trump ally, GOP Senator Lindsey Graham.
The day we withdraw from Syria puts in motion, I think, a lot of bad things in the region, and we'll eventually pay for it here, just as we did in Iraq.
And that was Kenneth Moten reporting. And in addition to the reaction from Congress, there's been a lot of reaction from around the world. Israel's prime minister is taking a sort of cautious approach, saying they will consider what the United States is doing and continue to protect Israel. The reaction has been much sharper from the Kurds, the group that has done the heavy lifting in the fighting against Islamic State in Syria. They are outraged, and a number of Kurdish groups say that this leaves them vulnerable now to a Turkish onslaught that could be coming perhaps in the next few weeks.
Right, and let us remember that this decision by the Trump administration comes just days after President Trump spoke with President Erdogan of Turkey on the phone. So we don't know what really took place in this conversation and how this conversation and maybe other interactions with Russia have influenced this decision. But the president, he does not want to be the type of president who engages in foreign conflicts for years, like the war in Afghanistan. He said it a long time ago. So it is a surprise, but it's not really a surprise that we see this withdrawal happening.
Yeah, and his view of Syria, simply as he said in his tweet, the only reason that he believes the United States was there was to defeat Islamic State. It was not to put the brakes on Iranian influence or stop the influence of Russia or necessarily even to stop Turkey from attacking the Kurds. It was simply to defeat Islamic State, although a week ago, the State Department said, well, the battle's not yet won against Islamic State. But in any case, the president has made his decision.
Let's bring into this discussion Jesse Jane Duff, a retired gunnery sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps and a senior fellow at a London Center for Policy Research. And Jesse, Senators Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, as we heard, they condemned the president's decision. They said if ISIS is back, then the president is to blame. How do you see this decision?
I understand where Lindsey Graham's coming from exactly. When you start incorporating other forces to fight your enemy and assuring them that you're there by their side and enabling them to defeat ISIS, as the Kurds have done, well, all we're doing now is pulling out and leaving them to be exposed to Erdogan's attacks. Well, many people are feeling that the president is doing this because he was forewarned by Erdogan that they would be placing attacks against these Kurdish forces. PKK is considered a terrorist organization by Turkey. However, they have been united united with the United States in fighting ISIS. This is something that we know without them would have been impossible. When we pull out like this and we do it abruptly, many of them are comparing it to how Obama had withdrawn from Iraq, and which essentially enabled ISIS to go in and basically defeat all of our accomplishments in Iraq, and essentially it almost appeared as if we had never been there. In fact, it was left in a worse state. So now, is this what's going to happen?
But, Jesse, is it really fair to make the comparison with Iraq? I mean, we had 150,000 troops that were in Iraq that we draw down from that number. Here it's just 2,000 that were essentially spotters, yes, for the Kurds, and maybe they won't be there. But a number of military folks have said, look, the United States still has aircraft that can fly and do bombing missions to protect the Kurds if necessary.
Yes, I think it is fair to describe it that way, because whether it be 2,000 or 150,000, when we've been fighting ISIS, we haven't had that large of a number on the ground in the first place. Keep in mind, we had already withdrawn from Iraq. It's because of our forces teaching these Arab allies, along with the PKK or the Kurdish allies, how to fight, when to fight, and how to do it strategically, that has made this mission a success. Let's make no mistake, manpower on the ground can never be replaced by air power, because when you are talking about fighting forces on the ground, they need to understand what the best concepts of strategy are. Yes, it's wonderful that we'll provide air support, but what we're saying to our allies is we will not be there glued side by side. I am not faulting President Trump in any way or any level. I support him immensely, but I don't know that he's been given the best advice in this, because we do not need a reputation throughout all of our missions as coming in, assuring people will be there, and then pulling out and not being there when they need us. These Kurdish people have been decimated numerous times by various forces, whether it be the Syrian forces or whether it was the Iraqi forces. They are in Iraq, they're in Iran, and they're in Syria, and they've been a minority that has never received much support, let alone from the outside world. They have been destroyed. They were chemical warfare was performed on them by Saddam Hussein. These people, as we know, have suffered immensely, and they're fighting for their freedom. They want to have an autonomous region in northern Syria.
But if the clear definition of U.S. presence there was to narrow down ISIS and their operation and defeat them, then why not pulling out? What about the reputation of a country who engages endlessly in international conflicts militarily, unable to define what's a success on the battleground?
Exactly. We can't even say this is mission accomplishment right now. We want to make sure that when we withdraw from any force that we do know that it is over or that we've accomplished our goals. We have forces throughout the world that have monitored and been present to prevent for future hostilities. We had forces in Germany and still do, but essentially after World War II, Japan. We can go on and on. With many places, forces have maintained a presence. Maintaining a presence tells the world that our work was not going to be defeated. As soon as we pulled out, we were going to ensure that it stayed in place and there was a maintenance level there. We didn't do that in Iraq, and look what happened. All of the effort, all of the American lives that were lost, all of the blood in their soil and sand, our treasure was lost because we did not follow through. Just because you pull out doesn't mean you've won.
Jesse, do you believe there's a possibility, or are you open to the possibility, that maybe President Erdogan of Turkey gave President Trump certain assurances, and the United States, in turn, gave some new weapons to Turkey, which was just approved, and this is all part of an effort by the Trump administration to say, okay, we're now going to hold Erdogan accountable. He's given us his assurances that the Kurds will be safe. Now, at least President Trump feels comfortable in pulling U.S. troops out.
There's always possibility of assurances that we will never know about. And I also want to be very careful with any criticism that I do project here, because at the same time, we never know exactly what has been said. But Erdogan has, although we are NATO allies, we've had a very, very difficult situation with Erdogan. He has not been someone that we have been able to count on in recent years. Would I expect that he's going to play fair? No. He warned us that he's going to attack these Kurds, and I expect that he will.
Jesse Jane Duff, retired gunnery sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps, senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Jesse, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it. We will we'll see in the next couple of weeks. Either the Kurds will be fine or the Turks will roll in and attack them once U.S. troops leave. And then, of course, the blame will be back on President Trump.
And, of course, there's some political prestige in announcing withdrawal just before Christmas.
Just before Christmas. Still ahead on Crossroads, the United Nations Security Council is refusing to back Israel and condemn the extremist group Hezbollah for their terror tunnels across the Lebanese border.
And the United States may loosen the travel restrictions to North Korea for humanitarian aid in an attempt to reignite denuclearization talks.